In the quiet hours between day and night, when the world softens and the heart speaks in whispers, stories come alive. This is one such story, a gentle journey of two souls who find each other beneath flickering lanterns in a town where light and shadow dance together. One night, Lanterns Between Us is a tale of hope, healing, and the fragile courage it takes to love and trust again. So, settle in, let your breath slow, and let the soft glow of this story guide you into a world where even the darkest nights hold a promise of light. The blackout came quietly, like a tired breath at the end of a long day. One moment, the lights in the harbor town hummed and buzzed like usual porch lamps flickering. Vending machines glowing in the corners of narrow alleys. Radios whispering from windows left open to the warm night air. Then, without drama or warning, everything fell still. No pop, no flicker, just silence and then darkness. It was the kind of dark that made the stars more honest. Above the town's sloped rooftops, the sky bloomed wide and deep. The moon was only a sliver, sharp and watchful, and the sea beyond the bay absorbed every echo like a mother folding her arms around a restless child. Nell noticed the silence before he noticed the dark. He'd been sitting on the floor of a second floor, room above an old wine shop, cross-legged and barefoot, scribbling in his worn brown notebook. The words hadn't been flowing, not exactly, they were pacing, hesitant, like someone unsure whether to stay or leave. When the electricity died, the overhead light gave a single sigh, and then the room fell still. The soft hum of the ceiling fan stopped, a song playing faintly from a room next door cut off mid-verse. For a moment, Nell sat motionless. He wasn't surprised. It had been that kind of summer, slow, brittle, full of waiting. He stood, slid his notebook into the inside pocket of his jacket, and stepped into his shoes without tying them. He didn't bother with his phone. He knew the battery was low, and besides, it didn't seem right to bring something buzzing and modern into what already felt like the start of an old memory. Outside, the air was thick with jasmine and the salt of low tide. The cobbled streets shimmered faintly from the day's heat, and somewhere a dog barked once, then fell silent. Most windows had gone dark. A few flickered with candlelight. Paper lanterns, kept more for charm than use, began to appear one by one on balconies and porches, lit by hands reaching out into the stillness. Nay walked slowly, his steps quiet, his breath matching the hush of the town. It felt like the entire world had been turned down a notch, as if the gods had dimmed the switch and left everyone to figure out how to be without noise. He wandered without aim through side streets lined with ivy and laundry left to dry on sagging ropes. He passed shuttered cafes, their chairs stacked neatly, and a bookstore with a chalkboard out front that read, "We close with the sun and rise with the moon." The poetry of it made him smile. At the edge of a small stone plaza, he saw a flame. A single lantern glowed behind a glass paneled door. Its light spilled onto the step and caught the hem of a pale dress. A woman sat there, alone, with the lantern beside her. She was not looking at the flame, but past it, toward the trees beyond the square. Her hair was pulled back, loose strands curling around her neck. She had the posture of someone listening, though, for what Nail couldn't guess. He hesitated, then stepped forward, slow enough to give her time to notice. She did. Her eyes shifted toward him, calm and unbothered. "You can sit if you like," she said. Her voice was soft and clear, like a bell heard through mist. "The dark's big enough for two." Nail lowered himself to the step, a small distance from her, careful not to disturb the silence they shared. The lantern crackled gently between them. "I didn't expect to find anyone else out," he said. "I didn't expect anyone to come by," she replied, turning her gaze back to the trees. "But here we are." They didn't speak for a while. After that, it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt, instead, like the kind of quiet people share when something has ended and they haven't yet decided what should begin. Eventually, she asked, "What brings you out? No light where you're staying?" There was light, then there wasn't, he said with a shrug. "I thought I might hear the town more clearly without it." She nodded. "It's a good night for listening." "I'm Nell," he offered. After another quiet moment, she glanced at him sideways, clearer. He repeated the name gently, as if trying out the weight of it in his mouth. "Alira." He said again, "It means to be free of something." She said, "Elise, that's what my grandmother used to say." "Are you?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. Another silence came, but this one felt different, deeper somehow, shaped by the lantern's glow, by the nearness of two people who'd never expected to meet and now couldn't quite look away. Elira stood. She lifted the lantern carefully, casting light across her face. "I was going to walk to the pier," she said. "They say the sea sounds different when the power's out, like it forgets we're watching." Nail rose beside her. "Do you mind if I walk with you?" She studied him for a moment, then nodded. But we walked like people in a dream. No noise, no answers, just steps. And so they began to walk down the slope of the plaza, past houses curled into sleep, along streets that hadn't seen a car in hours. The lantern swayed between them, casting shadows on stone walls and flowering vines. The town said nothing, but it listened, as it always had, and overhead, the stars leaned in. The path to the pier curled like a thought not quite finished. It ran along the edge of the town's old quarter, where walls were patched with moss and ivy. and stairs appeared where no map had ever marked them. Nell and Elira walked in step, without meaning to. They didn't speak much, but neither of them felt the need to. The lantern swung gently from her hand, painting amber ripples on the stones beneath their feet. Shadows danced against shutters and door frames, turning the street into a moving painting. The night pressed close, but not with weight, with presence. It wrapped around them like a thick wool shawl, quiet and grounding. Elira walked ahead sometimes, only by a few steps, the lantern lifting her profile into something almost mythical, half woman, half memory. Nell found himself watching her more than the road, not out of desire, but wonder. She moved like she belonged to the dark, not as its prisoner, but its guest. "Is this where you live?" he asked finally, not because he needed to know, but because he wanted her voice again. "No," she replied. "I came for the summer, the place with the red shutters and too many wind chimes. You've probably passed it." "I think I have," he said. It sounded like a small orchestra in the wind. She smiled at that, the corners of her mouth lifting gently. "The landlord said they were good luck. I think they're just restless." They reached a narrow alley where the stone steps descended toward the sea. The air changed cooler, now touched with brine and something else, something old. Elira paused and tilted the lantern toward the slope. "Careful," she said. "These steps are always a little slick at night." Nell followed her down slowly, each step whispering underfoot. At the bottom, the path widened into a wooden pier, stretching out into the black sea like a tongue tasting the sky. The lantern's glow reached only a few feet ahead, but the moon, shy as it was, added its sliver of silver to the boards. They walked to the end without hurry. There, Elira stopped and set the lantern down between them. The sea was almost too quiet. It lapped gently at the pier's legs, a slow hush-hush like breathing through sleep. The town behind them was dim, its lights no more than ghostly suggestions behind shuttered windows. Nell sat first, legs dangling over the edge. Lyra followed, pulling her shawl tighter around her. Their shoulders didn't touch, but the space between them was charged alive in a way only stillness can be. "I used to come here when I was little," she said. "My mother would let me stay up if I promised not to ask too many questions. I never kept that promise." "What did you ask?" She smiled, looking out toward the horizon, where the sea ends, but the stars were called before people named them. Why the moon looks lonelier when it's full. Nell looked at her, the way she folded her words gently, as though she were placing them into a letter she'd never sent. "Did she answer?" he asked. "She made things up, beautiful lies, the kind that make you believe in them anyway." Nell nodded. "Those are my favorite kind." They sat like that for a long while, the lantern flickering beside them, casting soft golden light across their knees and hands. The sea breathed. The pier creaked. Somewhere far off, a gull cried once, then vanished into the soundless sky. "Are you riding tonight?" Elira asked. "Not yet," he said. "I think I'm still gathering. From me." He glanced sideways at her, smiled faintly. "From this, from now." She leaned back on her palms, face tilted toward the sky. "Do you ever feel like something is watching you when it's this quiet?" "Sometimes," he said. "But maybe it's not watching. Maybe it's remembering. Elira closed her eyes. I like that. They let the silence grow again, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some words only arrive once you've waited long enough for them. And this night, this soft, endless, starlit night seemed made for waiting. Nell looked down at the water below their feet. It shimmered with the lantern's reflection, a little pool of fire trembling on black glass. If I dropped a wish into the sea, he murmured, do you think it would sink or float? Alira didn't open her eyes. Depends on the weight of the wish. A soft gust passed between them, and Nell caught the scent of her perfume, something faintly floral, slightly bitter, like tea steeped too long. He committed it to memory without meaning to. He wanted to ask her why she was really here, what she was escaping or hoping to find, but the night told him not to. It wasn't time yet. Instead, he reached down and adjusted the lantern slightly, shielding it from the breeze. Do you think the power will come back soon? He asked. Lyra opened her eyes and looked out across the water. I hope not, she said softly. Some things only happen in the dark. They stayed like that too. Shadows held in the arms of a quiet sea, with only a lantern between them, and a night that had no intention of letting go just yet. The night deepened slowly, folding the town and the sea into a velvet hush. The stars, bold and unashamed, spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds, brilliant against the ink-black canvas. The blackout had pulled the vast heavens just a little closer to Earth, and with it, the quiet seemed to breathe more deeply, as if the world itself were exhaling a long-held sigh. Nell and Alira remained seated at the edge of the pier, their legs swinging gently above the dark water. The lantern between them flickered, casting a golden pool of light that trembled with the gentle night breeze. The ocean beneath reflected the sky's shimmer, so the world looked as though it had folded in on itself, stars floating on waves, waves cradling the stars. For a time, they simply watched. No words came, only the sound of the sea, rhythmic and endless, lullaby older than time. Then Alira spoke, her voice soft but steady, threading through the night like a delicate thread of smoke. I haven't told you why I really came here, she said, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sea kissed the sky in a silver blur. Nell turned slowly to face her, the amber light revealing the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, the way her hands rested loosely on the wood beside her. Do you want to? He asked, his voice low, careful. She hesitated, as if weighing her words against the quiet. My life used to be so loud, she began, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't joy or celebration, it was the kind of noise that wears you down. Expectations, like heavy chains. People telling me who I should be, what I should want. I felt like a bird trapped in a cage made of their voices. Nell nodded, understanding immediately. The kind of understanding that doesn't need many words. So you left? Yes, I did, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. I came here to lose my name for a while, to disappear into the silence and try to find myself again. maybe to hear the thoughts that got drowned out before. He looked out at the sea, its endless blackness both terrifying and beautiful. Have you found what you were looking for? Elira's eyes glimmered with something fragile. Sometimes, she said quietly, but the silence is a strange thing. It can comfort, but it can also remind you of what you left behind. The ghosts that follow, even when you run. Neil's voice was barely above the whisper of the waves. Silence holds everything we don't say. It's not empty, just waiting. She nodded thoughtfully. Waiting for what, I wonder? They sat side by side, the space between them charged with unspoken stories, until a distant sound stirred, faint clinking of glass, soft laughter, voices weaving together like threads of warmth in the cold night. Elira's gaze flicked toward the town. Someone's still awake, she said. Do you want to see? Neil asked, curious. She smiled, a quiet invitation. Yes, maybe the town is waking up after all. They stood and began to walk back along the wooden pier, their footsteps gentle on the aged planks. The lantern's glow wavered, casting elongated shadows that stretched and folded like soft secrets along the path. As they neared the square, the sounds grew clearer. Laughter, murmured conversations, the delicate clink of glasses raised in quiet toasts. Lanterns glowed warmly from windows and doorways, flickering like fireflies caught in jars. Gathered outside a small cafe, a cluster of familiar faces huddled close, speaking low and smiling in the candlelight. A guitar rested silent against a chair, waiting for its moment. The blackout had thrown them together, forcing them to find light in each other's presence. Elira's lips curved with genuine warmth. The blackout has a way of bringing people together, she said softly. Neil took a slow breath, absorbing the scene. It's as if the town remembers who it is when the noise fades away. They lingered in the quiet hum of connection until Elira glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go, she said reluctantly. Tomorrow will bring its own noise. Neil hesitated. Will I see you again? Her eyes, bright under the lantern's light, held a promise. Maybe, when the sky grows quiet again. With that, she melted back into the winding streets, her figure framed by the soft glow of red shutters and lantern-lit doorways. Neil stood alone for a moment, the lantern's warmth fading as the night pressed in. For the first time since arriving, he felt the stirring of something unfamiliar hope. A fragile thread weaving through the silence, connecting two solitary hearts under the vast, whispering stars. The night was a quiet guardian, reluctant to let go of its reign. Deep in the heart of the small coastal town, darkness clung to the narrow streets like a soft velvet shawl. The blackout had stretched the hours, folding time gently around the inhabitants like a shared secret whispered under breath and lantern light. Above the sky was a vast, inky canvas flecked with stars, brilliant, sharp points of light piercing the darkness with a clarity only possible when the usual city glow was stripped away. The constellations shone as though they had been rearranged, overnight, closer, more intimate, inviting anyone who looked up to lose themselves in their slow, eternal dance. The sea beyond the pier was a muted mirror of that sky, its surface calm and glassy in the absence of wind. Occasionally, a ripple disturbed the water, a soft sigh from the depths that shimmered like liquid silver in the lantern glow. The ocean was both distant and near, its steady breathing a lullaby for those who knew how to listen. Nell walked slowly through the town, his footsteps soft against the worn cobblestones. Each stone told its own stories, moved by generations of bare feet and quiet footsteps, edges worn away like memories faded but never forgotten. The walls of the old buildings stood tall and proud, their plaster cracked and peeling in places, yet still holding firm against time and tide. Faint tendrils of jasmine drifted through the air, carried on a gentle breeze that whispered promises of a coming dawn. The scent was delicate but persistent, weaving itself into the night like an unseen thread tying together the past and present. Somewhere nearby, a vine clung stubbornly to a faded shutter, its tiny white blossoms glowing faintly in the dark. As Nell passed a small cafe, its windows dark except for a lone candle flickering on a wooden table inside, he caught a glimpse of the familiar red shutters that dotted the town. Their deep, earthy color stood out against the pale stone walls, a silent reminder of the lives held within these quiet homes. The blackout had stripped away the usual hum of electric life. There were no neon signs, no cars humming by, no buzzing street lamps. Instead, the town breathed in slow, steady rhythms, the murmur of waves against the shore, the occasional clink of glass as a door opened, the soft murmur of voices exchanged beneath the shelter of night. Neil's thoughts wandered to Alira. She had moved through the evening like a shadow made of light, both present and elusive. Her story, shared in fragments, had settled in his mind like a melody, waiting to be fully heard. It's the strength beneath her quiet exterior, the delicate tension between hope and regret, made her feel like a secret the night itself wanted to keep. He continued his walk, the wooden planks of the pier creaking softly beneath his feet. The lantern he carried cast a warm, golden pool of light, illuminating the rough grain of the wood. The glint of salt crystals caught in the air, and the gentle swell of the ocean beneath. At the pier's edge, Nell paused, looking out across the water. The horizon was a thin line, barely perceptible in the dark, where sea and sky blurred together. Above, a solitary seagull called a lonely, its plaintive sound that echoed and faded into the vastness. The lantern's flame danced in the breeze, its light trembling like a heartbeat in the night. Nell felt the pulse of the quiet around him, soft sigh of waves, the distant laughter from the town square, the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. With a slow breath, he pulled his coat tighter against the cool air and turned toward the steps leading up to his room above the old wine shop. The building creaked and settled as he climbed, a living thing holding stories and memories within its aged walls. His room was small but warm, as the window opened to the first hints of dawn. The scent of old paper and ink filled the space, mingling with the faint aroma of sea salt that drifted in on the breeze. The notebook lay waiting on the desk, its blank pages like an invitation to fill the silence with words. Nell sat down, the chair creaking softly beneath him. He opened the notebook slowly, the pages whispering as they turned. His pen hovered for a moment, then began to move, tracing delicate lines across the paper, words not forced or rushed, but unfolding gently like the night itself. Outside, The town began to stir. A door creaked open nearby. Footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones. A cat padded silently across a rooftop, and somewhere far off a rooster gave a tentative crow, uncertain, hopeful, announcing the slow arrival of morning. But for Nail, the night was not yet done. It lingered inside him like a quiet echo, a gentle whisper of things unseen and unsaid. He wrote of lanterns flickering against shadowed faces, of the ocean's endless murmur, of a stranger's voice that had stirred something long asleep. The dawn's first light brushed the horizon in pale gold and rose, painting the world in soft hues that promised new beginnings. Yet Nail remained by the window, wrapped in the embrace of the night's fading silence, knowing that sometimes the most important stories begin not with light, but with the echoes left behind in the quiet. The dawn slowly seeped into the town, like ink bleeding softly across a page. Gentle fingers of pale light crept through cracks in the shutters, spilling onto wooden floors and dusty windowsills. The sky transformed from a star-speckled abyss to a watercolored wash of soft pinks and tender blues, delicate as the wings of a butterfly unfolding at daybreak. Nail remained by his window, the fresh morning air brushing cool and fragrant against his face. The jasmine and sea salt mingled with the distant scent of baking bread and freshly brewed coffee wafting from the bakery below. It was a smell that promised warmth, comfort, and the simple rhythm of daily life slowly stirring awake. Below, in the square, lanterns hung from eaves and balconies, their soft amber glow dimming as the sun's first rays touched the cobblestones. A few early risers wandered out, their footsteps tentative and slow, as if reluctant to fully leave behind the quiet magic of night. A woman in a faded blue dress swept the stoop of her shop, the broom moving rhythmically, sending dust motes swirling into the golden light. Her eyes, deep and knowing, lifted for a moment to meet Neil's gaze through the open window, sharing a brief, unspoken understanding of the fragile beauty in these moments of transition. Neil's thoughts drifted back to Alira. She had spoken of silence as both a refuge and a reminder, a space where ghosts linger and truths emerge. He wondered what stories her silence held, what memories traced the lines of her face, and what dreams flickered behind her quiet eyes. The notebook lay open on the desk, pages curling gently in the breeze. Neil's pen hovered, then began to flow again, capturing the morning's delicate dance, the way light played on the peeling plaster walls. The murmurs of the sea far below, the whispered greetings exchanged in hushed tones. Outside, the town's heartbeat quickened. Doors opened wider, shutters creaked back, and laughter began to ripple through the narrow streets like a soft melody. Children's voices echoed faintly, chasing each other along stone pathways, their footsteps a joyful counterpoint to the solemn of the night before. Nail rose and stretched, feeling the warmth of the morning seep into his bones. He moved to the small kitchen corner, where a kettle hummed softly on the stove, and the rich aroma of coffee began to fill the air. The simple routine grounded him, a tether to the waking world, even as his mind wandered in quiet reverie. He thought again of the lanterns their flickering light had been a beacon in the darkness, a fragile thread tying people together in the absence of electricity and noise. In those moments, the town had seemed both smaller and infinitely vast, a place where strangers could meet as equals under the watchful gaze of the stars. A soft knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find the cafe owner, an older man, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "For you," he said simply. "Thought you might like this after last night." Nell accepted the cup with a grateful nod, feeling the warmth seep through his fingers. The gesture was small, but full of meaning, a quiet kindness in a world that often felt too loud and too fast. As the sun rose higher, spilling golden light into every corner, Nell felt a stirring inside him. The night's silence had passed, but its echo remained, a reminder of the fragile connections that bind us, seen and unseen. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the moment, the blend of bitter and sweet, the warmth that spread through him like a slow flame. Outside, the town was alive again, but inside him, the quiet lingered, a whisper beneath the noise. And somewhere beyond the rooftops, Lyra was out there too, carried forward by the same fragile hope and the promise of a new day. The sun climbed higher, spilling warm light across the town's weathered rooftops and cobblestone streets. Shadows retreated, folding quietly into corners, leaving the world bathed in gentle gold. The air hummed softly with the return of life, chatter of neighbors greeting each other, the faint clang of shutters being thrown open, and the rhythmic tapping of footsteps moving purposefully along familiar paths. Nell lingered at his window, watching the town's slow awakening. The early morning haze softened the sharp edges of the buildings, wrapping them in a gauzy veil that seemed to blur the boundaries between reality and dream. From this vantage, the world felt tender, almost fragile, as if one breath might scatter it like dust in the wind. He traced the curve of the bay, where fishing boats bobbed gently, their masts swaying like delicate reeds. The sea's surface caught the light in glittering shards, reflecting a sky now bright and clear. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries piercing the stillness with wild, joyous abandon. Inside the room, the notebook rested on the desk, heavy with fresh ink and unfolding thoughts. Neil's fingers lingered on its edges, as though he could feel the stories pressing to be told, the emotions waiting to be released. He thought of Alira again, the way she had held her lantern against the night, a fragile flame fighting the dark. She was a mystery wrapped in quiet strength, her silences speaking volumes louder than words ever could. There was a vulnerability beneath her calm, longing that whispered of lost dreams and unspoken fears. Neil's own heart echoed that longing. The night had stirred something in him, a deep ache for connection, for meaning beyond the ordinary. He realized that sometimes the most profound stories are found not in grand gestures or sweeping moments, but in the small, fragile threads that tie one soul to another. With a deep breath, he closed the notebook gently and moved away from the window. The day had begun, but the night's magic remained, woven into the era's subtle presence that would linger in the quiet spaces between words and memories. He stepped outside, the warmth of the sun on his skin grounding him in the here and now. The town bustled softly around him, but his mind carried the stillness of the night, a quiet echo that would not fade. As he walked toward the market square, he wondered if he might see Alira again. Perhaps their paths would cross once more in the soft light of morning or the fading glow of dusk. Or perhaps she was meant to be a fleeting presence, a lantern in the dark that showed the way but could not be held. Either way, Nell knew one thing for certain. The night had changed him. It had cracked open the shell around his heart and let the light seep in, slow and steady as the dawn. And in that light, new stories would begin. morning sun poured over the town like a slow, golden tide, washing away the remnants of night and filling the narrow streets with warmth and light. Windows threw rectangles of brightness onto stone walls, and the scent of salt and earth mingled with the fresh aroma of baked bread and roasting coffee. Nell stepped outside his room, the wooden door closing softly behind him, and took a deep breath of the morning air. The town was alive, but it felt quieter, somehow like a whispered conversation that held space for both the noise and the silence between words. He wandered toward the market square, where stalls were just beginning to set up. The vendors moved, with practiced ease, arranging fresh fruit, bundles of herbs, and baskets of sea salt crystals, their movements measured and calm. The soft murmur of early customers began to thread through the air, voices low and familiar. At the edge of the square, a fountain tinkled gently, its water sparkling in the sunlight. Nearby, an old man sat on a worn bench, his weathered hands resting on a cane, eyes closed as if absorbing the morning's quiet blessing. Nell hesitated a moment, then smiled and nodded in greeting before continuing on. The scent of jasmine still lingered faintly, weaving through the bustle like a delicate thread connecting the town's moments, a reminder of the night's soft embrace. Nell found himself drawn toward the cafe from the evening before. The windows were now wide open, and the clatter of cups and cheerful chatter spilled out into the street. Inside, the owner recognized him immediately and beckoned with a warm smile. "Coffee on the house," he said, as if the memory of last night had sparked a silent bond. Nell accepted gratefully, settling at a small table by the window. The steam rose from the cup in curling tendrils, fragrant and comforting. He watched the street come alive, children darting between stalls, women exchanging laughter, fishermen unloading their morning catch. Yet, amidst the gentle chaos, his mind lingered on Alira, the flickering flame in the darkness, the stranger who had become a quiet presence in the night. He wondered where she had gone after they parted ways. What roads she walked now as the sun climbed higher. The cafe's warmth wrapped around him like a soft blanket. Yet, beneath the surface, the echo of the night's silence pulsed steadily, gentle undercurrent beneath the lively day. Nell opened his notebook again, fingers tracing the familiar leather cover. But today, the pages seemed both inviting and daunting. The stories he wanted to write were no longer just about shadows and lanterns, but about the fragile light that followed the moments between darkness and dawn, between strangers and themselves. He began to write, slowly at first, then, with growing confidence, words spilled out like water, carrying fragments of the night and seeds of the day. He wrote of waiting, of hope, of the way light softens the sharp edges of solitude. Outside, the town carried on life in its quiet rhythms, the weaving of countless small stories, each as fragile and vital as a flickering flame. And in that weaving, Nell found a new kind of story emerging, one not only of shadows and silence, but of connection and light. The morning unfolded slowly like a delicate bloom, reaching for the sun. The streets grew busier, but the town still moved with a gentle rhythm, as if savoring each moment before the full heat of day took hold. Lanterns that had once glowed in the night now hung quietly, their purpose complete, but their presence subtle reminder of the night's soft magic. Nell lingered over his coffee, watching the interplay of light and shadow on the walls opposite the cafe. The sunlight streamed through leafy branches, casting flickering patterns that danced with the breeze. He found comfort in these simple, fleeting moments, where time felt less like a force pushing forward, and more like a companion walking beside. As he closed his notebook, a familiar voice drifted through the hum of the cafe. "You're here early," Elira said, stepping lightly beside his table. Her presence was as unexpected as a sudden breeze that stirs still waters, yet as natural as the sunlight that warmed the day. Nail looked up, surprise and warmth blooming together. "I didn't expect to see you here," he replied, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. Elira smiled softly, eyes reflecting the golden morning light. "The town has a way of pulling you back," she said. "Or maybe it's the stories we leave unfinished." They sat together, two quiet figures in a world slowly waking around them. Words flowed easily between them, small stories, shared memories, the kind of conversations that build bridges out of silence. The noise of the cafe faded into a gentle backdrop, a lullaby underscoring their connection. Outside, soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine and sea salt through the open windows. The lanterns above remained silent witnesses to their meeting, testament to the fragile light that binds strangers in the darkness and leads them into the dawn. Nell realized then that some stories aren't just written on paper, they are etched in moments shared, in the spaces between words, in the quiet understanding that lingers long after voices fall silent. The sun climbed steadily, casting long, warm rays that reached into every corner of the town. The marketplace buzzed softly now, vibrant with life colors and sounds mingling in a tapestry of everyday beauty. Bright fabrics fluttered on lines between stalls. The scent of fresh herbs mingled with baked bread, and laughter spilled like music through the narrow alleys. Nail and Elira stepped outside the cafe together, their footsteps light on the cobblestones. The air was fresh, tinged with the promise of a new day and the salt of the nearby sea. Lanterns hung quietly above them, their faint glow now unnecessary, but still comforting. It's like old friends keeping watch. They walked side by side without needing to fill the space between them with words. The town around them breathed in gentle rhythms, the flutter of a bird's wings, the murmur of waves against the pier, the distant ring of a bell calling the fishermen home. Nail felt a quiet strength in the shared silence. It's an unspoken bond growing in the soft light. It was a feeling he had not known. He craved the comfort of presence without expectation, the gentle warmth of connection forged in the spaces between moments. As they reached the edge of the pier, the ocean stretched out before them, vast and shimmering. The horizon melted into the sky, a seamless blend of blue and gold. The sea whispered stories of distant lands and unseen depths, inviting them to listen, to dream. Elira turned to him, eyes reflecting the morning's glow. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the most important journeys are the ones that start quietly, no map or plan, just the hope of finding something real." Nail nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. The night had passed, but its light remained a lantern carried forward into the brightness of day, guiding him toward new stories, new beginnings. Together, they stood on the pier, the world waking around them, and a quiet promise of connection shining like a beacon between their hearts. The afternoon sun draped the town in a soft amber glow, the warmth lingering like a gentle embrace that coaxed the shadows into retreat. The sky above stretched vast and clear, painted in hues of cerulean and gold, while a mild breeze carried the scent of salt and wildflowers through narrow streets lined with shuttered windows and vine-clad balconies. Nell walked slowly beside Elira, their steps blending with the muted hum of daily life, the clinking of cups at the cafe terrace, the soft chatter of neighbors exchanging news, the faint scrape of paintbrushes in a nearby studio where an artist captured the town's serene beauty. Each sound, each movement, felt like a thread weaving a delicate tapestry of moments fragile, yet full of quiet significance. They paused at a small garden tucked between two weathered stone buildings, where bright marigolds and lavender spilled from pots and cracked soil alike. The scent was sweet and earthy, mingling with the distant cry of gulls and the lapping of waves against the shore. Elira's gaze softened as she knelt to touch a lavender bloom, her fingers tracing its delicate petals. "There's a kind of peace here," she said, quietly, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. Nell nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle around them like a gentle fog. "It's as if the light itself is fragile," he replied, threading through the cracks and shadows, making everything feel a little more possible. They stood in silence for a moment, the sun casting long patterns on the cobblestones, the garden's colors vibrant, yet subdued in the late afternoon light. Elira turned to Nell, her eyes reflecting the fading sun. "Do you think stories can change us?" she asked softly. "It's not just the ones we tell, but the ones we live." Nell considered this, feeling the weight and wonder of the question. "I think they do," he said finally. "They thread through our lives, weaving new shapes from old wounds, and sometimes they give us the courage to find the light even when it seems lost." The words hung between them, a fragile bridge connecting to wandering souls in a town that felt suspended between memory and hope. As the sun dipped lower, the lanterns around the square began to glow faintly, their soft light reaching out like tiny beacons in the gathering dusk. Nell caught Elira's hand gently, a silent promise shared beneath the growing twilight, and in that quiet moment, amidst the threads of light and shadow, their story unfolded, inwoven with hope, resilience, and the tender courage to begin again. The lantern's glow deepened as dusk settled, casting a warm amber light that flickered softly against the ancient stone walls. Shadows stretched long and slow, weaving patterns that seemed almost alive, whispering secrets of the past, stories carried by the sea breeze. Nell and Elira walked through the quiet streets, their footsteps muffled by the soft carpet of fallen leaves and worn cobblestones. The world around them was hushed, as if holding its breath, waiting for the night to fully bloom. The scent of salt mingled with the faint perfume of honeysuckle, wrapping around them like a delicate veil. Somewhere nearby, a nightingale began its plaintive song, a single melody that echoed through the cool air, tender and aching all at once. They came upon an old wooden bench beneath a twisting olive tree, its branches heavy with silvery leaves that shimmered in the lantern light. Without a word, they sat side by side, the silence between them rich with unspoken understanding. Elira's fingers brushed against Neil's hand, gentle, tentative touch that spoke louder than words. He turned to meet her gaze, finding in her eyes a reflection of his own hope and vulnerability. "It's strange," Elira murmured, "how a single night can change everything, and yet leave so many questions unanswered." Nail nodded slowly. Maybe that's the point. Life isn't about having all the answers. It's about learning to walk forward anyway, carrying the light we find, no matter how small. The night deepened around them, the lantern's flames flickering in the gentle breeze like tiny stars brought close to earth. The town seemed to breathe with them, its heartbeat steady and slow, a quiet companion on their journey. For a moment, time stretched and softened, and the world beyond faded into a blur of shadow and light. Here, in this shared silence, Nail and Delira found a fragile piece of promise that even in the darkest moments, there is a thread of light waiting to guide them home. The night air grew cooler as stars began to sprinkle the velvet sky, each one a delicate point of light shining through the vast darkness. The town was quiet now, wrapped in a hush that seemed sacred, as if the world itself was holding its breath, cherishing this fragile moment between day and night. Nail and Delira remained, seated beneath the olive tree, the soft rustle of leaves their only soundtrack. Around them, the lanterns flickered like fireflies caught in a slow dance, their warm glow a tender reminder of the light they carried within. Elira's voice broke the silence, soft and thoughtful. Do you ever wonder what comes next? After the story's end, what the spaces between chapters hold? Nail looked up at the stars, tracing the familiar constellations with a quiet reverence. I think the spaces between are where life truly lives. The pauses, the silences, they're not empty. They hold the breath before a word, the stillness before a step. There where hope gathers. She smiled, a gentle curve that softened the shadows around her. Hope, she whispered, like a lantern in the dark. Their hands found each other again, fingers intertwining in a silent promise. It wasn't a declaration or a vow, it was something simpler, yet profound. The recognition that even amid uncertainty, they would walk forward together, carrying their fragile light. As the night deepened, the town seemed to settle into a quiet embrace. Somewhere, a distant church bell tolled softly, its sound echoing through the stillness like a heartbeat, steady and true. Nail and Delira rose slowly, the weight of the night settling around them like a cloak. They stepped away from the bench, their shadows stretching long and intertwined beneath the lantern's glow. The path ahead was unknown, winding through moments yet to be written. But for the first time in a long while, the darkness didn't feel so daunting, 'cause in the quiet between them, a thread of light had been woven, fragile, steady, and infinitely hopeful, and that thread would carry them forward into whatever stories awaited. Morning unfolded slowly over the seaside town, spilling soft light like honey across the rooftops and cobblestones. A faint breeze stirred the curtains in Neil's room, carrying the salty scent of the ocean mixed with the subtle sweetness of blooming jasmine. Sky was a pale canvas brushed with strokes of coral and lavender, promising a day both calm and full of possibility. Nail stood by the window, watching fishing boats drift lazily on the shimmering bay, their sails catching the morning light like fragile wings. The sea whispered softly, waves a gentle murmur that seemed to echo the quiet rhythm of his own thoughts. Below, The town was waking, slow and deliberate. Shopkeepers unlatched wooden shutters, the creak blending with the distant calls of merchants arranging their stalls. Children's laughter bubbled from a nearby square, a bright and fleeting melody that danced in the air like sunbeams. Nell felt the weight of the morning stillness settle around him, pause that stretched beyond time, where memories and hopes wove together like threads in a tapestry. The night's magic lingered, softened now into something tender and luminous, a quiet glow beneath the surface of the day. His notebook lay open on the desk, pages fluttering lightly in the breeze. He reached for his pen but hesitated, as if the stories waiting to be told needed more than words. They needed the unfolding of moments, the slow bloom of understanding. A soft knock at the door stirred the room's silence. Elira stepped inside, carrying a small basket of freshly picked herbs and wildflowers, their colors vivid against the pale morning light. Her eyes held a quiet warmth, the faintest smile touching her lips. "Good morning," she said softly, setting the basket down. "I thought you might like some fresh air and little color to start the day." Nell smiled, feeling a calmness settle deep within. "Thank you. It's perfect." They moved to the window together, gazing out at the awakening town. For a moment, words weren't needed, just the shared presence, the gentle unfolding of a day full of quiet horizons and unspoken promises. The sun climbed higher, soft rays filtering through the curtains and casting a warm glow across the wooden floor. The scent of herbs from the basket mingled with the salty breeze drifting in through the open window, filling the room with a quiet freshness that seemed to seep into their very bones. Elira moved about the room with ease, arranging the wildflowers in a small vase while Nell watched, feeling a calm settle over him like the gentle tide rolling in from the sea. The simple ritual of morning light, scent, color felt like a balm to the soul, a quiet rhythm to ground their restless hearts. Outside, the town began to hum softly, the murmur of footsteps and distant voices threading through the air. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolled the hour, its clear sound folding into the gentle chorus of the day. Nell found himself drawn to the window again, his eyes tracing the horizon where sea met sky in a seamless blend of blues. He thought of journeys, not just the physical roads traveled, but the inner paths that wound through memory and hope, fear and courage. Elira joined him, her hand finding his as naturally as the tide meets the shore. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the most important journeys are the ones we take within ourselves. It's the ones where we learn to trust the light, even when the way isn't clear." Nell nodded, the weight of her words settling deep. "Sometimes," he said, "it's the quiet moments like this one that teach us the most. The moments when we simply breathe and let the world be." They stood together in the soft morning light, the silence between them full and alive as space, where hope flickered like a lantern in the dusk, steady and sure. The afternoon sun warmed the town as Nell and Elira stepped outside. The streets bathed in a gentle golden light. The cobblestones beneath their feet felt smooth and familiar, worn by countless footsteps, but steady and true. A path that seemed to invite new stories with every step. They wandered slowly toward the harbor, where boats bobbed gently on the shimmering water, their sails catching the light like delicate wings poised for flight. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their calls weaving through the breeze as if carrying messages from faraway places. At the edge of the pier, Nell paused and looked out over the vast expanse of sea and sky. The horizon stretched endlessly, a quiet promise of horizons yet to be explored, both outward and within. Illyra stood beside him, her hand finding his once more. "The world is wide," she said softly, "but sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we take together." Nell smiled, the warmth in her voice echoing the light that settled in his chest. "Then let's walk those journeys, step by step, wherever they may lead." They stayed a moment longer, the gentle lapping of waves and distant cries of seabirds blending into a peaceful symphony. The lanterns strung along the pier began to flicker on, casting a soft glow that mirrored the quiet flame of hope burning steadily between them. As the day faded into twilight, Nell felt a deep sense of peace, of fragile, steady light that promised new beginnings, new stories, and the courage to face whatever lay beyond the quiet horizons. The evening wrapped the town in a velvet cloak, soft and heavy with the weight of unspoken dreams. The sky had turned a deep indigo, dotted with trembling stars that blinked quietly like distant whispers of hope. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and something bittersweet, the scent of memories lingering just beyond reach. Nell stood at the edge of the pier, his gaze fixed on the restless waves below. The sea reflected the night's fragile light, shimmering with secrets and stories he longed to understand. His heart ached with a quiet longing, a feeling both tender and raw, as if the weight of the past was folding itself around him, gentle but relentless. Behind him, the soft rustle of footsteps brought Illyra close. She moved with a grace born of silent strength, her eyes reflecting the depth of the night, shadows and light intertwined like the fragile threads of their story. "Sometimes," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the sea breeze, "the heart carries echoes we don't always understand. They whisper to us in moments like this, when the world is still and we are left alone with ourselves." Nell turned to her, searching her face for answers he didn't have. What if those echoes are too loud? What if they pull us into places we're not ready to go? Illyra's smile was a fragile lantern in the dark. "Then we hold on to the light we have, even if it's just a flicker, because that light is all we need to find our way back." For a long moment, they stood together, two souls suspended in the fragile balance between hope and fear. The waves whispered around them, carrying the echoes of countless hearts past and present, each one a thread woven into the vast tapestry of life. Nell felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, the ache in his chest both painful and healing. In that quiet, shared space, he realized that the deepest connections are born not from certainty, but from the willingness to be vulnerable, to carry the echoes of the heart, still keep walking forward. The night grew deeper, wrapping the town in its quiet embrace. The lanterns lining the pier flickered gently, casting soft halos of golden light that danced upon the water's restless surface. Each flicker seemed to echo the fragile beat of Neil's heart, certain, searching, yet steady in its rhythm. Illyra's hand found his again, warm and sure amidst the cool night air. "There's a kind of bravery in feeling everything so deeply," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "even when it hurts." Neil's breath caught. He looked down at their joined hands, the strength in her touch anchoring him amid the swirling storm of emotions inside. "I've carried silence for so long," he admitted softly. "But with you, it feels like I'm learning to speak again, to let the echoes out." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, reflecting the starry sky above. "And I'll listen," she promised, "no matter how long it takes." They moved slowly down the pier, the world around them fading into a blur of shadows and light. The ocean song rose and fell a lullaby, both ancient and tender, carrying away the weight of unspoken fears. In that sacred night, under the watchful stars, Snail felt a fragile hope take root in ember, glowing quietly, promising that even in the darkest depths, connection could heal and love could grow. The night air was cool against their skin as Nail and Alira reached the end of the pier. Beyond them, the vast ocean stretched into shadowed infinity, its surface shimmering faintly with reflected stars. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of things said and those yet to be spoken. Alira turned to Nail, her eyes searching his with an intensity that made his heart tremble. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the hardest part is not holding on to the past, but learning to forgive ourselves for the shadows we carry." Neil's voice was barely audible. "I've carried regrets like stones in my pockets, dragging me down, keeping me from moving forward." She stepped closer, her hand lifting to gently brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "You're not alone in that. We all carry burdens, but love is the light that can make even the heaviest stones feel lighter." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The stars above shimmered, and the gentle lapping of the waves whispered promises of healing and renewal. Nail reached for Alira's hand, holding it tightly as if anchoring himself to the fragile hope blossoming between them. "Thank you," he said softly, "for being my light in the dark." She smiled, a smile full of warmth and quiet strength. "And thank you for trusting me with your heart." As the lanterns flickered softly behind them, two stood together, two souls bound by fragile threads of light, hope, and the unspoken promise that whatever storms came, they would face them side by side, and in that shared silence, a new chapter quietly began. The dawn stretched slowly across the horizon, brushing the seaside town with gentle strokes of pink, lavender, and gold that shimmered on the calm surface of the bay. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of salt mingled with earth, and the delicate perfume of blooming jasmine that spilled from vines, crawling up ancient stone walls. From his small balcony overlooking the quiet harbor, Nail wrapped a thin shawl around his shoulders, his breath forming soft clouds in the morning chill. The town below was stirring gradually. Wooden shutters creaked open, revealing windows that caught the first soft light like fragile jewels. The rhythmic clatter of shutters being raised mixed with the occasional distant bark of a dog and the soft murmur of early risers greeting the day. He leaned on the wrought iron railing, eyes tracing the silhouette of fishing boats bobbing gently. On the water, their sails furled, but ready for the day ahead. Seagulls wheeled lazily overhead, their cries sharp and clear, filling the space between sky and sea. His thoughts drifted like the tide toward the stories waiting in the folds of this new day. The fragile promise of beginnings and the quiet hope carried in moments unspoken. Behind him, the soft rustle of footsteps drew his attention. Elira stepped onto the balcony, a woven basket in hand, filled with freshly picked herbs and wildflowers. Her hair caught the light like threads of spun gold, and her eyes held a warmth that contrasted with the cool morning. "Good morning," she said softly, setting the basket down on a small table. "I thought the day deserved a little color." Nell smiled, the faint crease around his eyes softening. "It does. Thank you." They stood side by side, their silence a gentle conversation in itself as the world slowly woke around them. The breeze tugged playfully at Elira's scarf, lifting loose strands of hair. And Nell found himself watching the way the light caught the curve of her smile. "Do you ever feel," Elira began, voice barely above a whisper, "that the quiet moments, the ones that pass almost unnoticed, are where life really happens? The spaces between grand gestures and loud declarations?" Nell nodded thoughtfully, watching a sailboat glide silently across the water. "I do. It's in those moments that hope is born, quietly but persistently. They shape us more than the storms." The morning deepened, the sun climbing higher, spilling golden light over rooftops and narrow alleys. From below, the market began to hum as vendors arranged baskets of fresh produce and fishermen hauled in their morning catch. The scent of baked bread wafted from a nearby bakery, mingling with the sharp tints of sea salt. Elira reached into the basket and pulled out a sprig of lavender, twirling it between her fingers. "Sometimes I think we rush through life, searching for meaning in grand things, forgetting that the smallest moments can hold the greatest significance." Neil's gaze softened, like the way the light plays on the water or the sound of a single bird's song in the quiet. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath to souls finding refuge in shared understanding. A gentle chime echoed from the town square, marking the hour. The day's rhythm quickened. But Nell and Elira remained wrapped in the tranquility of the moment of fragile, precious thread woven between dawn and day. The morning sun climbed steadily, its warmth growing heavier on the skin, but the breeze from the sea kept the air fresh and alive. Nell and Elira stepped down from the balcony and made their way through the narrow, winding streets of the town. The cobblestones beneath their feet were worn smooth by generations of footsteps, each stone holding stories in its quiet solidity. The town was now fully awake. Merchants shouted their wares in cheerful bursts, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer rang steadily from a workshop nearby, and children's laughter spilled out from a cluster of narrow lanes where they chased each other with carefree abandon. The scents of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and sea salt mingled in the air, wrapping the town in a comforting embrace. Elira's basket swung gently at her side, filled with wild herbs, fragrant flowers, and freshly baked bread she had picked up at the market. The colors of the flowers were vivid against the muted tones of stone and wood, bright yellows, soft purples, and deep reds, creating a small riot of life amid the earthy surroundings. They walked slowly, their pace unhurried, as if trying to hold on to the fragile piece the morning offered. Alira's eyes darted to a small garden overflowing with honeysuckle and morning glories, while Nell paused to watch a cat slink through a sun-dappled alley. "Do you ever feel," Alira said, breaking the comfortable silence, "that some days carry a weight that's both heavy and light, like the pull of the sea tugging you deeper, but also lifting you higher?" Nell nodded, his gaze distant yet focused. "Yes, it's strange how the things that challenge us can also teach us to rise." They reached the harbor's edge, where the sea stretched out vast and endless, its surface glittering like 1,000 scattered diamonds. Fishermen prepared their boats, their movements practiced inshore. Nets were repaired, ropes coiled with care, and the low murmur of conversation filled the salty air. Nell inhaled deeply, the briny temps filling his lungs, and felt a flicker of something unspoken, a blend of fear and hope that stirred in his chest. He glanced at Alira, whose expression was quietly serene, and found strength in the calm steadiness of her presence. "We carry so much inside us," she said softly, "but sometimes it's the sharing of that weight that lightens it most." Nell looked down at their joined hands, the roughness of her palm a comforting contrast to his own. "It's strange, isn't it? How vulnerability can feel like both a risk and a refuge." Alira smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling in a way that made her seem both younger and wiser at once. "That's the heart's paradox, its greatest fear and its greatest strength intertwined." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows and bright light over the harbor, Nell felt a quiet peace settle over him, a feeling not of certainty, but of acceptance. The day was unfolding, and with it, the slow weaving of new beginnings from the fragile threads of the past. They lingered a moment longer at the water's edge, watching a small boat push off from the dock, its sail catching the breeze and carrying it toward the horizon, and endless promise waiting beyond the quiet sky. The afternoon sun softened as it began its slow descent, casting long, warm shadows across the town's cobblestone streets. The air was thick with the mingling scents of salt and earth, carried on a gentle breeze that stirred the leaves of the olive trees lining the square. The soft hum of life, distant chatter, clinking cups at the cafe, and the occasional bark of a dog wove a comforting backdrop to the quiet moments between Nell and Alira. They found themselves drawn to a small bench, nestled beneath an ancient fig tree, its gnarled branches heavy with dark, ripening fruit. The tree's wide canopy offered a sanctuary of dappled shade, and they settled there without a word, letting the world move around them while they simply existed in the stillness. Nell reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, its pages worn and filled with scribbled poems and thoughts. He flipped it open to a blank page, then hesitated, searching for words that could capture the tangled emotions within. Alira watched him, her gaze soft but steady, as if offering quiet encouragement. "Sometimes," she said, "the heart needs space to speak, even if only on paper." He nodded, pen hovering above the page. Slowly, the words began to flow, fragile verses about longing, hope, and the ache of new beginnings. The act of writing felt like breathing again after a long silence, each line a small step toward healing. As the sun dipped lower, the sky blushed with hues of amber and rose. A flock of swallows darted overhead, their swift movements a delicate dance against the fading light. Nell closed the notebook gently, a small smile touching his lips. "Alira," he said softly, "thank you for being here, for seeing me, even when I struggled to see myself. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek in a tender, grounding touch. We all need someone to help us find our way back to the light. I'm grateful you let me in. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, the moment suspended in quiet grace. Beneath the quiet sky, two hearts beat in gentle rhythm, fragile, hopeful, and ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning was slow to arrive, as if the world itself lingered in the delicate hush between night and day. A pale mist clung to the edges of the town, softening the sharp lines of rooftops and tree branches, wrapping the world in a veil of quiet mystery. The scent of damp earth rose from the cobbles, mingling with the faint, sweet aroma of gardenias blooming nearby. Nell awoke to the gentle rhythm of rain tapping against his window pane, a soothing murmur that seemed to wash away the residue of restless dreams. He lay still for a moment, eyes tracing the shifting shadows cast by the droplets as they slid down the glass, each one like a tiny, fleeting memory. The room was cool, filled with the faint scent of lavender from the sachet Elira had placed by his bedside. He breathed it in deeply, feeling a calm settle inside him, a quiet promise that the storm inside could begin to ease. Rising slowly, Nell dressed and made his way to the small kitchen where the soft glow of dawn filtered through white curtains. Outside, the world was wrapped in a delicate fog, the shapes of trees and houses blurring into gentle forms that whispered of beginnings and endings. Elira was already there, tending to a small pot of tea, her movements fluid and serene. She looked up and smiled as he entered, her eyes bright despite the gray morning. Rain always brings a kind of cleansing, she said softly, pouring tea into two delicate cups, a chance to start fresh. Nell took a cup, the warmth seeping into his hands, and nodded. It's like the world pauses, gives us a moment to breathe. They sat close together at the worn wooden table, the silence between them comfortable, filled with a shared understanding of healing and hope. Outside, the rain continued its gentle song, a reminder that even in the darkest moments was beauty in the quiet persistence of life. The rain's gentle patter outside created a rhythmic backdrop as Nell and Elira lingered in the small kitchen, their voices soft, blending seamlessly with a soothing sound. The teacups steamed between their hands, carrying a faint herbal aroma that mingled with the earthy scent of rain-soaked stone. Just beyond the window, Nell traced idle patterns on the worn wooden tabletop, his thoughts wandering to the winding journey that had brought them here. Two fragile souls meeting in a town caught between past and present, light and shadow. He felt the quiet weight of those memories settled on his chest, a familiar ache tinged with newfound hope. Elira caught his gaze, her eyes steady and warm, and in that moment, he saw the gentle strength that had drawn him in, courage to face the unknown and the willingness to hold space for vulnerability. Do you think, she asked quietly, that sometimes we have to lose ourselves to truly find who we are meant to be? Nell considered her words, the question lingering like a whispered secret. I believe that's where healing begins, when we let go of the parts of ourselves that no longer serve us, even if it means stepping into the unknown. Outside, the rain softened to a mist, droplets clinging like tears to the window pane. The world seemed to breathe anew, refreshed and waiting. Elira reached across the table, her hand finding his in a touch both grounding and tender. "We're all works in progress," she said. "And sometimes the most beautiful stories come from the spaces between the broken pieces." Nell squeezed her hand gently, feeling the fragile thread of connection strengthen between them. "Thank you for being part of the story with me." She smiled, a quiet light in the gray morning, and for a moment, the room held nothing but hope. A promise whispered on the wings of rain. The rain began to wane, its steady rhythm giving way to the gentle drip of water from eaves and leaves. Side, the town shimmered under a soft veil of mist, the cobblestones gleaming like scattered pearls. The sky, once a blanket of gray, started to lighten, revealing pale streaks of blue that promised the day's slow awakening. Nell and Elira rose from the table, their movements unhurried, as if reluctant to leave the quiet refuge the morning had offered. Together, they stepped toward the window, watching as the mist curled around the familiar shapes of the town, the worn stone walls, the twisted olive trees, the rooftops that caught the first hesitant rays of sunlight. A fragile warmth spread through Neil's chest, mingling with the quiet hope that had begun to take root in the spaces left bare by past shadows. He turned to Elira, his voice low and steady. "I think I'm beginning to understand what it means to let the past go, not to forget, but to forgive." Elira's eyes softened, and she nodded, a gentle smile playing on her lips. Forgiveness isn't always about others. Sometimes it's the grace we give ourselves to heal. They stood side by side, two figures silhouetted against the soft light, bound by the unspoken promise of new beginnings. The day ahead was uncertain, filled with both challenge and possibility. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like something worth facing. As the sun broke free from the clouds, spilling golden light across the town and sea, Nell reached for Elira's hand, fingers intertwining in a quiet affirmation. The shadows might never fully fade, but together, they had found a way to walk forward, step by step, beneath the quiet sky. The evening settled over the town like a soft sigh that wrapped itself around the winding streets and stone walls. The fading light painted the sky in strokes of deep indigo and dusty rose, the first stars blinking awake in the twilight. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant promise of rain yet to come. Nell walked slowly beneath the lantern-lit avenues, the warm glow casting pools of amber that flickered with each passing breeze. His footsteps echoed softly against the cobblestones, a solitary rhythm in the quiet pulse of the town's slowing heartbeat. Around him, windows glowed faintly, the silhouettes of lives carried out behind curtains and shutters. He found himself drawn to the harbor, where the water mirrored the deepening sky, an endless sheet of inked glass scattered with the tiny sparks of light from moored boats. The gentle lapping of waves against the wooden docks was a soothing counterpoint to the stirring emotions inside him. Hope mingled with uncertainty, memory with desire. As he reached the edge, Elira was already there, seated on a weathered bench beneath an olive tree whose leaves whispered softly in the night breeze. Her eyes reflected the stars, calm and searching, and when she saw him approach, a faint smile curved her lips. "Waiting for me?" Nell asked quietly, sitting down beside her. "Not exactly," she replied, "but I knew you'd come." They sat side by side, the silence between them comfortable and full of meaning. Above, the constellations traced stories across the velvet sky, tales of love, loss, and the quiet strength found in the spaces between. Nell pulled his coat tighter around himself, feeling the cool air seep through. The night always feels different here, like it holds its breath, waiting for something. Lyra nodded. The night is where everything waits to be understood. The moments we don't say aloud, the feelings we tuck away until we're ready. He glanced at her, searching her face in the soft glow of the lanterns. "Do you ever fear what might be waiting in those silent hours? The truths we avoid?" She hesitated, then spoke with gentle certainty. "Fear is part of the journey, but so is courage. Sometimes the silence teaches us more than words ever could." A quiet wind stirred the leaves above, sending a shower of tiny petals drifting down around them like whispered secrets. Nell reached out, catching one between his fingers, the delicate texture a small comfort. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he admitted, voice low, "about how we move forward without losing what we found." Elira turned toward him, her gaze steady and warm. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. Sometimes, just holding on to what matters is enough." The night deepened, the town's sounds fading into a distant lullaby. Together, beneath the silent sky, they found a fragile piece of moment suspended between what was and what could be. The cool night air thickened as shadows deepened, wrapping the harbor in a velvet quiet that seemed to hold the world still. Lanterns hanging from wrought iron posts flickered softly, their golden light spilling like liquid honey onto the cobblestones, casting elongated silhouettes that danced with every breath of wind. Nell and Elira remained seated beneath the olive tree, its gnarled branches weaving a dark canopy overhead, flecked with stars. The scent of salt water mixed with the faint, sweet hint of jasmine blossoms drifting on the breeze, grounding them in this fragile moment between earth and sky. Neil's eyes traced the horizon where the sea met the night, a line blurred by mist and moonlight, shimmering like a promise just out of reach. He felt the gentle weight of Elira's presence beside him, a steady pulse against the fragile quiet, and a surge of gratitude warmed his chest. "I never imagined I'd find this," Nell said, voice barely more than a whisper. "Not here, not now, and yet it feels like coming home." Elira's smile was soft, tinged with a wistful sadness. Sometimes the heart finds its way in the most unexpected places, in the spaces between moments, in the silence after the storm. A single star blinked above them, bright and unwavering in the vast darkness. Nell reached out, his fingers brushing against Elira's hand, tentative at first, then sure, as if drawing strength from the connection. "Do you think we're brave enough?" he asked, eyes searching hers. "Brave enough to hold on, even when the past tries to pull us back?" Her gaze held a fierce kindness. "Bravery isn't about never falling," she said. "It's about standing up again and again, and choosing hope even when it's hard. The night air seemed to pulse with their words, carrying them across the quiet harbor. Somewhere, a night bird called softly, a haunting melody that echoed the bittersweet ache lingering between them. Neil closed his eyes, letting the sounds and feelings wash over him. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of waves, the steady beat of his own heart intertwined with hers. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, opening his eyes to meet hers, finding strength in the small moments and the quiet hours. Elira nodded, her smile a beacon in the dark. Together. As the night deepened around them, they sat beneath the olive tree, hands entwined, two souls tethered by fragile hope and the courage to face whatever dawn might bring. The night grew heavier, thick with the quiet weight of unspoken thoughts. The stars above shimmered faintly, veiled by wisps of drifting clouds that moved like slow breaths across the sky. A soft mist began to rise from the sea, curling and twisting around the docked boats and the edges of the stone pier. Nail and Elira remained seated on the bench beneath the olive tree, wrapped in a stillness that felt sacred round them. The world seemed to pause. The gentle lap of waves, the distant cry of a lone gull, and the occasional creak of timber were the only sounds, threading the night with life and memory. Elira leaned her head lightly against Neil's shoulder, the warmth of their closeness a quiet anchor amid the vastness. "There's a kind of beauty in the silence," she murmured. "In the space where words fall away and all that's left is feeling." Nail breathed her in the faint scent of lavender from her hair, mingling with the salt and earth, and found comfort in the simple truth of her presence. "I think that's where the heart speaks most honestly," he said softly. They sat in that gentle embrace, time stretching and folding around them. Each moment was a thread in a fragile tapestry woven from hope, loss, and the promise of tomorrow. Slowly, Elira stood and reached down to take Neil's hand, helping him to his feet. Together, they turned toward the path that wound back through the town, lanterns flickering like distant stars guiding their way. As they walked, the night whispered its timeless song, a lullaby for weary souls, a gentle promise that even in darkness, light could be found. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, soft light spilling like molten gold across the sleeping town. The sky was painted in gentle hues of lavender and blush, a quiet prelude to the day's awakening. The air held a crisp freshness, tinged with the scent of Dooky's wildflowers and the faint, distant salt of the sea. Nail stood by the window of his small room, watching the world soften from shadow into light. The cobblestone streets below were still empty, save for the occasional flutter of a bird taking its first hesitant flight. A breeze stirred the sheer curtains, sending ripples that danced across the worn wooden floor. He inhaled deeply, the cool morning air filling his lungs, and felt a calm settle within, a fragile peace born from the night's shared silences and whispered hopes. The memories of recent days, the quiet moments beneath the olive tree, the gentle touch of Alira's hand, the slow unraveling of fears were like threads weaving a tapestry of healing around his heart. Turning away from the window, Neil gathered his coat and stepped outside, the early sun casting long shadows that stretched and yawned across the town. The world was waking, slow and deliberate, each sound and movement a soft murmur in the vast stillness. He made his way toward the harbor, the path familiar and comforting beneath his feet. The sea lay calm, its surface smooth and mirror-like, reflecting the pastel sky with a quiet reverence. Fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings, their nets and ropes folded like sleeping creatures awaiting the day's work. At the water's edge, Lyra was already waiting, seated on the low stone wall that bordered the pier, her hair caught, the light of dawn shimmering like strands of spun gold, and her eyes held the softness of someone who had weathered storms, yet found grace in the calm. Neil approached slowly, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "Good morning," he said quietly. Elira looked up, returning the smile with one of her own, the kind that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken understanding. "Good morning," she replied. "The world feels different at this hour, doesn't it? Like everything is possible." Neil nodded, taking the seat beside her. "It's a new beginning, a chance to let go of what holds us back." The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of salt and wild herbs, and the distant cry of a gull echoed across the water. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the sun rose higher, its rays painting the waves with flickers of light that danced like tiny flames. Elira broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "Sometimes I wonder if we're brave enough to face what the future holds." Neil turned to her, eyes reflecting the dawn's gentle glow. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward despite it. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his. "Then, let's be brave together." A morning stretched before them open, uncertain, but filled with the fragile hope that comes when two hearts begin to trust in the light beyond the shadows. The sun rose, steadily, casting a warm glow over the town and setting the sea ablaze with sparkling light. The breeze grew gentler, carrying with it the mingling scents of salt and blooming wildflowers from the nearby hills. Neil and Alira remained at the harbor's edge, their figures silhouetted against the radiant morning as the world stirred too, life around them. Neil's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sky met the water, a seamless blend of soft blues and golds. He felt the vastness of the sea mirror, the openness growing inside him, a space where past pains could begin to dissolve, replaced by cautious hope. Alira's hand found his, their fingers entwining naturally. "Quiet moments," she murmured, "are where the echoes of who we are truly come alive." Neil smiled softly. "I never understood how much silence could hold until now." They rose together, walking slowly along the water's edge, the rhythm of their steps in sync with the gentle pulse of the waves. Around them, the town awoke, fully vendors setting up stalls, fishermen readying their boats, children's laughter beginning to spill into the air. As they wandered through the streets, familiar yet somehow new in the dawn light, Neil felt a growing sense of belonging. The scars he carried felt less heavy here, softened by the kindness that lingered in every corner, every glance, every shared moment. They paused before a small cafe nestled between two ivy-covered buildings, its windows steamed with the scent of fresh coffee and baked bread. Lyra smiled, eyes shining with quiet joy. "Shall we?" she asked. Inside, the warmth enveloped them like a gentle embrace. The soft murmur of conversation, the clink of cups, and the rich aroma of roasted beans filled the space with life and comfort. They settled into a corner booth, the worn leather, seats welcoming, over steaming mugs. Their conversation drifted from memories to dreams, from fears to fragile plans for the future. Each word, each glance was a thread weaving them closer, a tapestry of trust and understanding unfolding beneath the morning light. Outside, the town bustled, but within this small haven, time slowed a sanctuary where healing could take root and grow, nurtured by the simplest acts of connection and hope. The morning stretched into midday, the sun climbing higher and bathing the town in a warm, golden light that seemed to soften every edge. Through the cafe-spogged windows, the world outside moved with lively energy, merchants calling out their wares, children chasing each other with carefree laughter, and the occasional ripple of a distant bell marking the hour. Inside, Nail and Lyra remained nestled in their quiet corner, the outside world momentarily suspended. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of rich coffee, filling the air with a comforting embrace. Around them, the low hum of conversation wove a gentle background, a reminder of life's steady flow. Lyra's gaze softened as she spoke. "It feels like everything is starting to settle, doesn't it? Like the pieces we thought were broken are beginning to fit." Nail nodded, his fingers tracing absent patterns on the wooden table. "I've carried so much weight for so long, but here, with you, it feels lighter, like maybe I'm allowed to hope again." A quiet smile curved Lyra's lips. "Hope is fragile, yes, but it's also fierce. And sometimes that's enough to keep us moving forward." Their eyes met, sharing a moment of unspoken understanding. Outside, the world continued to turn, relentless and bright. But here, in this small space between two souls, time slowed, allowing them to breathe, to heal, and to dream. As the sun began its slow descent toward the afternoon, a gentle breeze fluttered through the open window, carrying the distant scent of the sea and the soft rustle of olive leaves. It was a whisper of promise that even in the quietest moments, life held the power to change. Nail reached across the table, his hand finding Lyra's once more. "No matter what comes next," he said, voice steady, "I want to face it with you." Lyra's smile deepened, her eyes shining with a light that seemed to banish shadows. Together, she agreed, and as the day moved onward, they sat side by side, anchored in the delicate strength of shared hope, ready to meet whatever the future held with open hearts and quiet courage. The evening air was soft, wrapped in the gentle hush of twilight that cloaked the town in quiet gold. Lanterns flickered along the winding streets like scattered fireflies, casting warm pools of light that danced against the ancient stone walls and ivy-clad corners. A delicate breeze carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine and salt from the distant sea, weaving memories and hopes through the cool air. Nell stood at the edge of the harbor, watching the water ripple beneath the lantern light, each wave catching the glow like fleeting moments of a dream. His breath was slow, measured, as if he were grounding himself to the earth beneath his feet, feeling the pulse of a place that had become more than just a refuge. It was home. Elira approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the cobblestones. And when she reached his side, the silence between them was full, not empty, but brimming with all they had shared, all they had yet to say. He turned to her, eyes reflecting the lantern's gentle flicker. "Tonight feels different," he said, voice low and steady, like we're standing at the edge of something, not an ending, but a beginning. Elira smiled, a slow unfolding of light in her eyes. Lanterns guide the way in darkness. They don't chase away the shadows completely, but they help us see where to step. Nell reached out, taking her hand, fingers entwining with a familiar tenderness. "And with you, I don't feel afraid to walk forward." Together, they moved toward the heart of the town, where the narrow streets gathered like threads of light and shadow, winding through memories and whispered dreams. Lanterns hung from every balcony, every doorway, illuminating the night with a soft, golden glow, a tapestry of moments, fragile and beautiful. As they walked, the distant sound of music drifted through the air, a melody both haunting and hopeful, weaving through the quiet streets like a breath. The townsfolk gathered slowly, their faces gentle and expectant, drawn to the lantern's light and the promise of togetherness. Nell and Elira found themselves at the center of the gathering, the warmth of the crowd wrapping around them like a shared heartbeat. The lanterns above swayed softly in the breeze, their light mingling with the stars scattered across the vast sky. Elira whispered, "We are not alone, never truly alone." Nell nodded, the weight of that truth settling deep inside him. No matter where life takes us, these moments, this light will always be here. Together, beneath the lanterns that flickered between them, they breathed in the night, a night of endings and beginnings, of shadows softened by light, of love found and held gently like a fragile flame. The music swelled softly, melody woven from the threads of old songs and new hopes. It carried through the cool night air, wrapping around the crowd like a gentle embrace. Its faces turned toward the small square where Nell and Elira stood side by side, the glow of lanterns flickering in their eyes. Around them, the townsfolk moved with quiet reverence, some swaying gently to the rhythm, others holding hands, sharing smiles, or simply breathing in the moment. It was as if the entire town had come alive in that shared light, connected by something deeper than words. Nell glanced at Elira, her expression illuminated by the golden glow, soft and serene. His heart felt full, not with certainty or answers, but with the simple, profound peace of being present. The lanterns above seemed to pulse in time with the music, their light casting a mosaic of warmth and shadow across the faces gathered below. Each flicker was a story, a memory, a hope, and in that dance of light, Nell saw not just the beauty of the moment, but the promise of many more to come. Elira's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried weight. "We carry our stories like lanterns, don't we? Some burn, steady, some flicker, but all guide us through. Nail nodded slowly, and even when the wind tries to snuff them out, there's always a way to protect the flame. A hush fell over the crowd as a young child stepped forward, holding a small lantern with trembling hands. She looked up at the stars, then at the gathering, her voice clear and bright. Light is never lost if we pass it on. The crowd smiled, a wave of warmth rolling through the square. Lanterns were lifted higher, casting golden beams into the sky, a constellation of human hope, fragile and fierce. Nail squeezed Elira's hand, their fingers a quiet promise. This night, these lights, they're ours to carry. She smiled, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Together, always. And beneath the endless canopy of stars, surrounded by the lanterns that bridged past and future, Nail and Elira stood united, two souls forever bound by the light they had found between them. The night deepened, folding the town into a gentle, quiet, broken only by the soft murmur of voices and the occasional clink of glasses raised in celebration. Lanterns swayed overhead, the light casting gentle shadows that danced like whispers on the walls and cobblestones. Nail and Elira lingered near the harbor, where the water caught the lantern's glow and sent flickers of light shimmering like tiny stars across the surface. The sea, calm and endless, stretched into the dark horizon, a mirror to the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. They stood close, the warmth of their hands entwined a quiet comfort in the cool night air. Neither spoke at first, for words felt small beside the vastness of what they shared, a bond forged through silence, understanding, and gentle courage. Elira's voice finally broke the hush, soft and steady. I used to fear the dark, the unknown, the silence between moments. But now I see that the darkness holds its own kind of beauty. Nail nodded, his eyes reflecting the lantern light like twin flames. It's in the dark that the lanterns matter most. It's when the light feels like hope. She smiled, the kind of smile that held both laughter and tears, pain and healing. And when the light is shared, it never fades. They turned together toward the town, where the last lanterns flickered bravely against the night sky. It's a promise of tomorrow shimmered in those glowing orbs, a testament to the strength of love, resilience, and the quiet magic found in simply being together. As they walked hand in hand through the streets bathed in amber light, Nail whispered, "No matter what comes, this, us, will be the light I carry." Elira squeezed his hand, her heart full, and I will carry it with you, always. The lanterns above seemed to pulse in gentle rhythm with their footsteps, a soft beacon for all who sought comfort in the night. And as the stars wheeled silently, overhead, two souls moved forward, forever linked by the lanterns between them, a light that would never dim. As the lanterns fade into the quiet night and the stars wheel silently above, the story lingers like a gentle flame nestled deep within the heart. In every moment of darkness, there is light waiting to be found. In every silence, a story waiting to be told. And in every connection, a spark that carries us through. May you carry this light with you, a reminder that no matter where life leads, hope shines brightest when shared. Thank you for walking this night between lanterns with Nail and Elira. May their journey inspire the gentle courage to seek your own light, even in the quietest hours.
you.